How and why has suffrage been expanded in the United States? Why has the expansion of suffrage been controversial? And finally, how have advocates of expanded suffrage used their rights under the First Amendment to achieve their goal? Begin.
Senator Barbara Boxer stated, "I am sure every one of my colleagues, Democrat, Republican, and Independent, agrees with the statement that in the voting booth, everyone is equal." Suffrage is the keystone to our republic. In the early development of the United States, voting was granted to white landowning males, while silencing the voices of women and Native Americans and other minority groups such as African Americans. However, in comparison to Great Britain's voting population of 6%, the U.S.'s voting population was 20%, opening the door for the expansion of suffrage.
In the Jamestown colony, the ability to vote was vested in citizens with an interest in government, those with property. However, as Roman philosopher Cicero said, freedom is participation in power. Those without suffrage cannot participate in government, thus diminishing the people's power. From the beginning, suffrage was highly contested by those who had the right to vote and those who did not, but were satisfied with the balance of power as it currently existed.
Integrating free black men into the political process through the 15th Amendment would essentially give all citizens equal say in their governments. Through the ruling Minor v. Happersett and Jim Crow laws such as grandfather clauses and literacy tests, white males were able to maintain the status quo of political oppression. Conversely, during the Reconstruction era, New York City Democrats took full advantage of past exclusion of black enfranchisement to build their party platform around the growth of suffrage through patronage.
The argument against women's suffrage was that the belief that they were already represented by their husbands and do not serve in their country militarily. By using the freedom of assembly, protections of public demonstration, initiated media action and open participation, calling for broader applications of suffrage rights. Calling themselves the Silent Sentinels, Alice Paul and the National Women's Party protested every day from 1917 to 1919 to gain suffrage, helping grant the 19th Amendment.
Disenfranchisement in the South was so prevalent that the only recourse was through the First Amendment. The NAACP hung flags, and Billie Holiday released the song, "Strange Fruit," using freedom of speech since it was the only power they had to raise the issue of racial struggles with the government and those with suffrage. Suffrage movements caused the Supreme Court to expand the First Amendment and to promote the right of expression. In the 1958 case NAACP v. Alabama, the Supreme Court protected the civil liberty rights of NAACP members from official harassment through the right of peaceful assembly.
Hoping to promote their suffrage rights, African Americans led a march on Selma, Alabama. The media attention brought on by the bloody protest led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and finally bringing voting rights to African Americans 100 years after the ratification of the 15th Amendment. During the Vietnam War, young people used the right to protest, arguing, "Old enough to die, old enough to vote."
Thus leading to the ratification of the 26th Amendment, overturning the case Oregon v. Mitchell, which lowered the voting age to 18. Despite the growth of suffrage for women, African Americans, and 18-year-olds, suffrage is still denied to many legal residents in many states due to Article 1, Section 4, allowing states to determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections.
Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, and New York are among the first states to provide legal residents voting rights in local elections, while North Carolina and Texas are increasing their voter ID laws with ruling of Shelby County v. Holder. As President Barack Obama stated in his 2013 inaugural address, "You and I, as citizens, have the obligation to shape the debates of our time, not only with the votes we cast, but with the voices we lift in defense of our most ancient values and enduring ideas." Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to begin with some cross-examination questions. If you want to go ahead and start, Bill.
Sure. The first question to you would be, do you believe that suffrage is a right, a privilege, or a duty? Please explain.
I would say suffrage is a right inherent to all people because, especially as you saw in the Roman Republic, voting and having the people able to have a say in the government allows for the government to function, so you're not infringing on life, liberty, or property.
I would say that voting is a privilege because, as seen, felons do not have the right to vote because they have been against the law and have not seen through the law, so they are not able to right to vote.
Voting is a duty because it is necessary for the continuation of a democracy. If people don't participate in the elections, like we see with young people, they don't participate as much as the older generation, their voice will not be heard in the government.
Voting is a right, but it is our duty as citizens to use that right to vote to influence the government to the standards that we see.
Are political parties a means that unite American people, or are they instruments of discord and dissension, which divide us as citizens?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Of course. Are political parties a means that unite the American people, or are they instruments of discord and dissension, which divide us?
The political parties definitely divide us. The Do Nothing Congress passed far more legislation than our current Congress now due to the political partisanship that we have. And so by focusing on parties and their views as a party, they move away from what the people want and the people's views on things.
Although parties do give the people options, as my colleague Will was saying, this Congress today has only passed 55 bills. That is an all-time low in history. So partisanship has obviously created major separation in the Congress, and we are not able to get anything seen by the government shutdown.
Although there is hyper-partisanship in Congress right now, we do need parties to connect people together to give them actual power in voting. If we were split up into 10 different parties like the British system, there would be a lot more infighting, and that we wouldn't be able to come together and actually have power, as seen like we have a 50-50 vote with Democrats and Republicans.
The other side of having political parties is that you have the big parties such as the Republicans and Democrats. You don't see as much say from libertarians or what other like independent parties. And this is also through the fact that we allow so much money to be given to these major parties, especially through the United States. The case that was allowing to have super PACs, especially by going through the nonprofit sector, you can allow these parties to become even bigger and lose the say of a lot of Americans.
Could America's constitutional democracy survive without political parties? Why or why not?
Yes, it could, because the Constitution was written without political parties in mind. So all the established guidelines and precedents are made for that kind of system, and the parties have just been to add in after that time.
Parties are also essential because in the Constitution itself, it says that you have to vote for the president and the vice president of their same party. It's essential in our Constitution. It's already there, and it's so much in the framework of how we have politics today.
The party system also allows when the Constitution was written, there wasn't nearly as many people able to vote at that time. So by having parties allows groups of people to vote for certain issues, and it shows which groups allows people to appeal to those certain groups of people that weren't really thought of when the Constitution was written.
But then again, parties are limiting you to a certain views that you may not agree with, just your Republican, Democratic, or Independent. There should be more options that other parties may not agree that aren't just limited in the Democratic, Republican, or Independent parties.
Given that we are a republic and not a direct democracy, does low voter turnout really undermine the American democracy? Explain your answer.
Well, low voter turnout does limit democracy, but our government still able to function because we use the delegate theory of representation somewhat. Our representatives can make their own decisions rather than the delegate theory. We recently had an Assemblyman Wheeler, who said he would vote for slavery if his constituents wanted it. So there's definitely some drawbacks with just listening to what your constituents say, and that would be like a direct democracy.
Hillary Clinton once stated that we need to protect the integrity of the voting process. This shows that, yes, it is undermining our Republican because we are not using our ability to stand for ourselves in such a great nation. Not voting does show that we are undermining the things that people are fighting for all over the world. Nelson Mandela once stated that he would die for the right for his people to vote. This shows that we need to appreciate the vote because we have that ability in our country to do so.
So since the founding period, we've expanded the right to vote to include all adult Americans who are not institutionalized. Do you think there's any necessity to expand voting rights to any other group or to change federal voting laws further?
One area I would have more voting rights is especially for immigrants who have come to this country. I know my dad has lived here most of his life and he still can't vote, as he's not a citizen, but he is a resident here. Because he's not allowed to vote in federal elections even though he follows it, part of his say in the government that still affects him isn't necessarily being heard.
The voting rights should also be expanded to felons who have been thought of to break the social contract with society. Prison is the punishment for their crime. Not voting, by not allowing them to vote or punishing them after their punishment has already been served. They should have a time after to assimilate back in society and learn what's going on and the issues that are up, and then they should be able to have their rights to vote put back in.
Furthermore, illegal immigrants should be able to vote in like local elections because these policies do affect their lives, and they do pay taxes in some cases, and they do have children in school. The government still affects them, so they should have a say.
In the story of Claude Rajana, he is paying taxes, his children go into public school. He's an immigrant, green card holder from Africa, and he's not able to vote, even though he works under the city. So, in local elections, I do believe, like my colleagues are saying, that they should be able to vote in a public election when it does affect their education board for their children, who are going to be the future of our country.
As you guys know, the women's suffrage movement began in around 1848. Yet it was 70 years, right around there later, that they finally received that right, the right to vote. What historical and political factors explain this lengthy time for them to be able to obtain that right?
The biggest factor is that women didn't really have an amendment or part of the Constitution that allowed them to argue for the right to vote. This came through the 14th Amendment specifically because they used the citizenship clause saying that they were citizens of this country, and the equal protection clause saying that they should have a say in the government.
Historically, African American and the women's suffrage movement were running at the same time, which allowed for a greater view of them. More people were able to connect with it or see it happen. And so as they ran together, that also helped get their message out farther. But then African Americans obviously got the right to vote first, which kind of left the women's suffrage movement a little bit behind.
Susan B. Anthony also advocated women's rights all through America after being imprisoned for voting illegally. Through Minor v. Happersett, the Supreme Court ruled voting for women's voting was illegal. So her voice to other women advocated for them to make more action towards their rights.
Furthermore, the 14th Amendment was passed directly after the Civil War, and it was made to only apply to African American men to give them equal protection. And so if you view an originalist viewpoint of it, such as Justice Clarence Thomas has of the case, then you'll see that it didn't really apply to women. And so women lost a lot of momentum from this decision, like the language of the 14th Amendment, like specifically.
How much time do we have left?
30 seconds.
I don't even know. I mean, by the time we ask the question, we're going to run out of time, so it's...
No, ask one.
I'll ask it, I can talk fast. Why did women argue the 14th Amendment gave them the right to vote? How did the Supreme Court counter their argument?
The language says that it applies to all persons, and they're a person.
Boom.